and slip, say, 75 years of subjective time into 8 hours of sleep, you would, I suppose, start out by fulfilling all your wishes. You could design for yourself what would be the most ecstatic life. Love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, gardens, music beyond belief. Music beyond belief. Music beyond belief. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. And then after a couple of months of this sort of thing, at 75 years a night, you'll be getting a little... You would move over to an adventurous dimension, where there were sudden dangers involved, and the thrill of dealing with dangers. You could rescue princesses from dragons, and go on dangerous journeys, make wonderful explosions and blow them up. Eventually get into contests with enemies. And after you've done that for some time, you think up a new wrinkle to forget that you were dreaming, so that you would think it was all for real, and to be anxious about it, because it'd be so great when you woke up. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. And then you say, well, like children who dare each other on things, how far out could you get? What could you take? What dimension of being lost, of abandonment of your power, what dimension of that could you stand? You could ask yourself this, but you know you'd eventually wake up. After you've gone on doing this, you see, for some time, you'll suddenly find yourself sitting around in this room with all your personal involvement, talking with me. How do you know that's not what you're doing? Could be. Because after all, what would you do if you were God? I wonder.
Okay, Dave Clark, let's roll. Hey everybody, Matt here. I'm looking forward. I believe this is episode number 8. Not all of them are up because we accidentally deleted some of them while editing, but at any rate, we're starting to get into our flow of things now. Similar to Tuesday, Matt will just be joining by phone. We're still getting our OBS studio or StreamYard or something set up so we can be able to have host through YouTube, because for some reason my share or invite somebody to my YouTube is not working, but we'll get that figured out eventually. But he's on the stream and we'll be joining throughout with some more questions. If you haven't had a chance to watch last stream and this is the first time you're joining us, my name's Matt Smith, and I've been creating my next dream job at the midpoint of my career to try and find new ways of working and new ways of learning and new ways of earning, given all the change that we're going through in the world. I've written this as a series. You can think of it as a series of books or a series of training courses, series of podcasts But at any rate, the series is called Staying Human and Staying Ahead. And it's all about the future of work, leadership, and being human. Been working on it for a couple of years. There are 6 different parts to it. The first part is called Work is Broken, School Maybe Too. The second one is called My 4 Dream Jobs, and it's all about providing a bit of a history around my career in human resources and some of the stories that I have about how I've been able to manifest 3 different dream jobs in my past, and working on my 4th one as we speak. The third part is called AI-penheimer and the Rise of Human Insight. I actually trademarked the word AI-penheimer. I thought it was pretty clever with that, but if you look at the parallels between the Oppenheimer story and trying to split the atom during a very complex, urgent, existential crisis, during a global conflict with this new technology, this new science, this new math, there's a lot of parallels between splitting the atom back during World War II and now the role that AI is playing in shaping and changing our world today in the situation that we find ourselves in. Right now, this is part 2 of the 4th book, if you will, or the 4th part. This is a to be continued segment for HRMAGEDDON. 3 huge crises, 5 confronting questions, and a new purpose for human resources. The star of the show, or where we get to the 5th piece of work, is called Advantage Human. And that's all about flow state, human insight, and hospitality. The things that really make us human and will be able to drive our success and well-being and future in an AI-enabled world, and in a world where we move from productivity to possibility to abundance. What are we going to do with this incredible technology that is coming, and how soon can we get to the point where it's going to be beneficial for humanity? Because that's not going to come easy, and that's not going to come really soon. We got to try and accelerate our way there through the next crisis, which could last several more years. But I'm certainly convinced that if we can harness our humanness, our human advantages, that we're going to be able to come out the other side in a number of years and create a world like that we just don't even recognize today, much for the better, is the hope and the aim, what we're going for. And then the final part is called Project Noise, and it's more about what I'm trying to create as a startup university to be there for lifelong learning, lifelong earning, and resources to remain human in that future, and Project Noise. So each one of these live streams, I'm just sharing my content for the first time. I think best by talking out loud. Matt's going to ask some questions. We do have the chat turned on, so feel free to send questions in the chat. We don't have a great number of people watching the live stream, but of course we're recording this for future, and hopefully in the future we will have more people joining us. So that's the context. Now, specific to HRMAGEDDON, if we're going to unlock those human advantages, we're going to need a very different workplace. The future of work is not going to look at all like it does for many people today. There are certain functions where it may look quite similar. I mean, the trades are the trades, and being a nurse or a doctor, or a server or a bartender, AI will enable, but there's a big part of those types of jobs that will only get better by AI, but will probably grow. But there's a lot of other jobs that will cease to exist, by nature of replacement through AI, or by nature of changing the entire ecosystem and the way business happens, that HR just is fundamentally changed in how it is structured, in what it's needed for, what its purpose is. So this work really aims to get out in front of that. This work aims to try and reshape an entire function of human resources, but also reshape leaders, business leaders, governmental leaders, nonprofit leaders, mindset on, how can we create a different style of workplace that, instead of just trying to fuel productivity and profit, allows us to unlock more possibility, and abundance, and gratitude, and other pieces like that. So HRMAGEDDON sits kind of in the middle of this as a problem or an opportunity, something to be reimagined, something to be blown up, something. At one point I shared on the previous stream that initially 2 years ago, I said it needed to be eradicated. And I even held the Let's Eradicate HR comedy show at Yuck Yucks. You can listen to the stream for that story previously. But what I wanted to share there is, this is where my work started 2 years ago. And after I had left my successful human resources career midpoint, and became disillusioned with HR, I thought, we got to do something different. It's not working. The corporate model is broken. The way that work is impacting humans is broken. We got to start to do something different. And I had a pretty good idea of what I thought we needed to do differently. So funny enough, this piece of work, HRMAGEDDON, which sits in the middle of the entire series, was where I started. And then I realized that, I had some pretty hot takes and was calling for a lot of change. So I really needed to build out around it. What's the problem to be solved? Why am I the person to solve that? There's a huge 1-year path I had to go down around artificial intelligence once we started using Gen AI, and I saw the impact that was going to have on the workplace. And then, of course, I needed a solution. Why are we blowing up HR? What are we aiming towards? And that's where Advantage Human comes in. And then what are my practical solutions? And that's where Project Noise, or creating a startup meta school for lifelong learning, earning, and remaining human, comes in. So on Tuesday, I was able to get through the first bit of HRMAGEDDON, sharing my personal experience and what makes HR great, and why I fell in love with it as a career, and all the great things that it has done for business. But then I also shared my HR heartbreak, and why it has maybe lost its way, or why it has become potentially a villain in the story, and how we can save it, how we can turn it around, how we can allow it to have the heroic and historic self-sacrifice to save humanity in the workplace, which is why I shifted from Let's Eradicate HR to HRMAGEDDON. So those of us who came from an HR background, we had to play the hero here, rather than where I was slightly more bitter and negative about HR a couple of years ago, when I suggested we should eradicate it entirely. Although, to my HR friends and loved ones out there, I do have to tell you, people not in HR really gravitated to that, right? And that doesn't surprise a lot of people in HR. I mean, you can go back as long as 15 years ago, right? The cover of Harvard Business Review, Why We Hate HR. They did another one about 6 years later. It's time to blow up HR for good. This is a rally call. This is a call to action. This is trying to share some new ideas, some different perspectives to disrupt what we're doing, with some imperfect thoughts, with some great thoughts, with some ideas that will work and I could help teams execute on them tomorrow, and some ideas that are maybe just loose concepts that I would need to, or we would need to, really try and work through some of the details. But that's what we're trying to do. So today we're going to talk about the 5 confronting questions, and we'll probably spend 15 to 20 minutes on each of those 5 on average. And then we'll wrap up by talking about a new purpose for human resources, right? It's fine for me to suggest that there's 3 huge crises we're going through. And in review, that's the replication crisis, because our studies and our data and the research we have doesn't meet standards. like being peer reviewed or replicated by others. We have an identity crisis because people don't really know what we do, and we keep rebranding ourselves, yet doing the same activities again and again for decades now. There really has been little innovation in human resources. So this looks to really look at that identity and say, instead of just embracing technology to do the same business processes we've been doing for 20 years, why don't we really think about different mindsets that will unlock different ways of accomplishing better things for humans, ideally to build better futures for all. So, and then the third is an existential crisis. I'm suggesting that 75% of the activities or the roles that we have in human resources will not exist 5 years from now. I was doing a little bit of research on that today, and looking at what people like Gary Hamel say, and David Ulrich, and some other kind of thought leaders in this area. And I might be a little strong in my 75%, but 50% is not is well supported by other people, and I'm still going to stick by my 75%. And in the more detailed stuff from the podcast, in the book and in the course, I actually go through all the functions of human resources, which I think I've mapped out about 18 of them, and kind of a prediction of where they're going to go. So that's where we ended up before, was really looking at those crises that we face. So after I identified those crises, my next move was to really start to think about what could we be doing differently. And that was inspired by some work that I had been doing in philosophy. So, of course, if you're thinking about humans and what it means to be humans, and you're thinking about the workplace and the future of work, and one of my beliefs that I've established previously in the Work is Broken chapter and AI-penheimer is that we are overstimulated. So STEM standing for STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math, which has been the most sought after academic students to have, fields to go into for the last 25 years. And being overstimulated means we've left some of the humanities behind. So I started right from going to philosophy and trying to understand philosophy very, very deeply. And then, of course, other humanities as well: psychology, sociology, history, but quite deep. I already had quite a bit of background in psychology, but quite deep into philosophy for a number of years, and it's become a real passion of mine. And one of the first insights, human truths, lessons that I came across was this concept of dark sides, or our shadow selves, and that part of our journey to actualization, part of our purpose for existence, is to integrate that shadow self into our whole in a way that it can be productive, and in a way that it can take us where we want to go. And you'll see throughout the work that that's really demonstrated by the yin yang symbol, which is, I've learned, is so much more than just a kick-ass tattoo and a great skateboard sticker. It has quite a bit to do about telling us how the universe works, and as the universe works, thus humans work, and thus how humans work, the workplace works. So the thinking led to this idea of HR dark sides, and I can remember when I was trying to envision this new consulting company. What would I want to do with human resources if I had a blank sheet of paper in the second half of my career? What would I do differently? And I was thinking about things, and at first I thought, okay, well, we've lost creativity in the workplace, so we got to get more towards innovation that's non-digital innovation or non-scientific innovation. Those things are great, and they can still come, but we need some human creativity, some imagination that fuels innovation. And then it hit me also, what if HR is the villain in the story? What would it look like? Just a thought experiment, not a declaration, but just a philosophical thought experiment from a hammock, where I really started to think about that. And I thought, well, you could see that perspective in the other side. And what might our dark sides be? And so I've defined the dark sides in many, many ways. And as a review of how I summed it up on Tuesday, when I talk about HR dark sides, I'm not talking about sinister things. I'm not talking about, 7 deadly sins. I'm not talking about those types of dark sides. What I'm really talking about is what we don't see. And when I ask these 5 confronting questions, they kind of came to me by really reflecting on, what were some of the unintended consequences of the things we've done in the last 25 years? What are the opportunity costs? Meaning, what could we have been doing if we weren't doing the things that we did? So, for example, if we weren't spending millions and millions of dollars and, a third of the human resources strategic agenda on HR technology, what could we have done with that time, with that money, with that imagination, with that attention from the boards and the C-suites? Like, what are the opportunity costs? If we gave up on trying to reconfigure performance management and performance reviews again, and just decided to spend that energy and that time and that money and our managers' attention and our employees' well-being and energy, if we had invested that somewhere other than trying to reimagine performance management. One of our 5 questions is about performance management. And I'm not exaggerating when I say in my 25-year career, I ended up building 4 different performance management systems. Sorry, 5. 4 for the companies I worked for, and then 1 as a consultant for another company. And it's this hamster wheel where we're just, people want to try and do something different. But at the end of the day, we all end up in the same place where we have to have performance management. So we'll get into that in the question that I have that is titled, "Is S.M.A.R.T dumb?" So those are the ideas of opportunity costs, and there's many more. And I'm really passionate about that one because, through my global career, I've come to realize that work is the most human experience there is on the planet, right? Billions and billions of us know what the work experience is like. We know what it's like to have a shitty boss. We know what it's like to have to wake up on a Monday and not want to go, or whatever day of the week you start your job. We know what it's like to not be listened to at work. We know what it's like to not be interested, and the impact it can have on our well-being, on our communities. And I think there's a giant opportunity to impact boldly a better world by changing the workplace at a time like now where all bets are off in the world, right? There's so much change going on in the next 3, 4, 5 years. It's a perfect time to seize this opportunity and throw out all that other stuff that we've been doing and make sure that we don't have lost opportunities, and that we seize this crisis to make some serious change. So that's what opportunity cost is about. And then the final dark side is really the blind spots. What are the unknown unknowns that we don't see? What is the threat or the perceptions that others have, or the thing that's coming at us that we can't see? It's purely in our blind spot. And there's many, but the most important and perhaps obvious one, if a blind spot can be obvious, that I argue for is artificial intelligence at work, Gen AI specifically, generative AI specifically. HR is in a position right now where we're being asked to upskill people, and we're being asked to help people learn how to adopt and accept and create policies for how we use generative AI. Really, ultimately, all we're doing is providing big tech with the data and the insight on our people, our processes, how we make money, and people's careers to ultimately replace their jobs, which might not be a bad thing as long as we can harness AI and create better futures for all. So those are where these questions came from, which were the dark sides. There's 5 different questions, one about culture, one about technology, one about hiring, firing, and promoting, or what I call talent management more broadly, one about performance management, and I forgot to update the slide. The 5th one is about learning and development, not HR's diagnosis. But you'll see there's a 5th one about learning and development. So here's the questions before I get into all 5 of them. So I won't explain them very much. The culture question, who weaponized woke? The HR technology question, are there arms dealers in the war for talent? The recruiting, interviewing, deciding who to hire and promote question, am I a one-eyed recruiter in the land of the blind? The performance management question, is SMART dumb? With SMART being an acronym that we use everywhere for setting goals and objectives, standing for specific, measurable, agreed upon, resourced, and time bound. And the one about learning and development, what if TED Talks and TikToks aren't enough? And where have we gone with learning and development in the last 25 years? And why won't that be serving us in the future, where we need to be moving much more towards creativity, imagination, possibility, new ways of working, leading, supervising, etc. And then there's the ultimate question, which is where I ended Tuesday's episode on, which is HR perverted? And if HR is perverted, just how perverted is it? So I will share my thoughts on that, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to think a little bit about that question as well. So let's get into the culture question. Who weaponized woke? So human resources has been turned to mostly to be the people to try and understand, shape, measure, guide workplace culture. Right? They're not responsible for it. That exists to everybody who works there, and particularly leaders. I think first and foremost, culture is a function of the leader. There's the saying, fish stinks from the head. But also, I think the brightest light can shine from the head, making up a metaphor on the go here, like, something about a lighthouse or something. But ultimately, it's about the leader, right? The whoever is the boss on that team, regardless of the size of the team, they shape the culture more than anything else. So workplace culture can be defined as the shared values, beliefs, and behaviors that guide how employees act. They unite teams. They should describe what the workplace experience might be like. They are claimed to be how we know if somebody is a fit, and that's a problem. We'll get into that when we talk about recruitment. But they're claimed to be, we're looking for people who fit our values. And what I think, or what they were intended to be initially, is one of the greatest forms of competitive advantage a company can have. Right? There's an old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And Peter Drucker is largely accredited with coming up with that concept first. Well, if culture eats strategy for breakfast, well, I think values can steal culture's lunch money. Like, values are what is at the heart of a culture. And it should be one of our greatest forms of competitive advantage. Talent, the people we have, and that most important decision we make of who we hire, who we promote, how we form teams, and what we do with our talent. I sometimes like to think of talent as the energy, and then our culture, right, which is, as our values, our beliefs, behaviors, etc. I sometimes like to think of it as the awareness, right, and how energy and awareness kind of play off of each other. But it has to be the most talked about corporate subject, yet under delivered on for a quarter century. you know, not everywhere. There are a handful of companies. I'm going to take a wild guess, say 15%, who have nailed this idea of what corporate cultures should be. I'll give you an example of one that I worked with. I had an opportunity to sit in on an investment company called Wellington out of Boston. Some of you may be familiar with Wellington. And, one of their shared values, a belief, and the behaviors they have is to actually create dynamic tension through debate, and through having people see issues on both sides of an issue. And so, at a weekly or daily meeting, I can't remember if it was weekly or daily, but the a large team would get together. I think pretty much most of their senior leaders, and one person would take a perspective on Apple, and the other person would have to take a different perspective on Apple and come together. And so that encouraging of debate, that encouraging of the dynamic creative tension, that's a value that drives something. Also from the finance world, Ray Dalio has a great perspective on critical transparency, or radical candor, like the ability to let people know exactly where they stand and how strong their credibility factor is, knowing that the core of that business, Bridgewater, sorry, I was trying to think of the name of the firm. Bridgewater is Ray Dalio. And great thought leader, and years ago he built the company around this value of transparency and hard feedback, and literally would have a rating system where after meetings and after decisions we would track and score each other, and ultimately you would have a credibility number afterwards. So that wanting and needing of like direct hard feedback, would be an example of cultures that work. So they're certainly out there, but again, I'm going to say it's like 15%. One of the things that supports me in that is, if you look at the Fortune 500, somewhere between 50 and 75%. Actually, I just saw another study that suggests it's between 75 and 90% have overlapping values, or almost the same values, right? And I've listed what I call the table stakes 10 out here. And, for whatever company you work for, or organization you work for, I wonder how many of these 10 can be found in your declared values: respect, integrity, accountability, collaboration, diversity, innovation, customer, excellence, sustainability, and authenticity. Those are overlapping in either meaning or exact words or intent for at least 3/4 of Fortune 500 companies, which, like, it's supposed to be our competitive advantage. It's supposed to be the intangible, tacit things that connect our talent and our energy to the purpose of the organization, to allow us to do it the best we absolutely can. And if it isn't a situation of competition and winning, allow us to win. So I get frustrated because, we're kind of paying lip service to that. And I think this is where human resources and even broader leadership has lost some credibility and believability. Is, we say these things, and we've been saying them for so long, but they don't make us different. They're not connected to what we want to do, and they are often not followed, right? So some people would call them aspirational values, which might mean that a CEO or a head of HR could stand up and say, well, we aspire. So we know there might be a bit of a gap in teamwork in some areas, but we aspire to close that gap. And, they think that by calling them aspirational values, they're kind of giving them that out. when people don't see it, it's clear that it doesn't exist. It's in the behaviors, the beliefs, right? The thing that unites us, what gets recognized, what gets accepted, what gets rejected. Um, those are all the things that values are supposed to be. And there's two main flaws that I've observed, or a couple of trends that I've observed as we've done all this values work, which typically goes with, purpose or mission, a vision, and a values. And I've had the opportunity to work with um, 20 different teams in the last 25 years, trying to help them find it. And only two, I think, did a good job of it. Because as a facilitator, there's only so much I could do, but two of them nailed it. But the other 18, they were at the table stakes 10. So the first thing that I've observed is many of the values are what we would call hygiene factors. So a hygiene factor is something that only matters or becomes relevant in its absence, right? So let's give an example of integrity, right? There's only a certain amount of integrity that's going to drive your competitive advantage, right? It's the absence of integrity that can destroy you. So I encourage everybody to look at values and ask yourselves, how many of them are hygiene values? Or another way you could think of that is, how many of them are playing defense? And how many of them are playing offense? How many of them are actually creating the environment and the behaviors that are unique to us, that will help us win or do better for those that we're trying to create value for? So that's one observation. The bigger one, and this has been particularly amplified in the last decade, is imitation virtues. So, having these values as a way we wish to be seen by other stakeholders, whether they're true or not, right? We want the board, we want potential employees, we want customers, we want our peers and competitors to all, think that we stand for vulnerability, we stand for being bold, we stand for humility, we stand for authenticity. But at the end of the day, it's in our actions that our virtues either become realized and actual, or they're just imitation virtues. And I think that's why, in this whole question around who weaponized woke, kind of accompanying the whole conversation about woke became, the virtue signaling, and this need for reasons other than remaining true to who we are and how we operate, saying we were certain things when we're not. And a big one for me, and from my 20 strangers research, where I've been talking with people for a couple of years, over 200 now, that comes up when we talk about values in workplace, is this whole idea of authenticity. We have degraded or eroded the meaning of the word authenticity, and I think it needs to be rebranded. I think that because it is one of the main topics that come up when I'm talking to people about their workplace, and when I'm talking about HR, right? HR always says, "Be authentic, be authentic," and I love this quote, like, "Be authentic." No, not like that, right? And it came from a place of wanting to be well-meaning. It came from a place of wanting to serve other people and create psychological safety, so people could contribute more regardless of who they were. It got linked very, very closely and overlinked or overstated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, certainly a part of it, but that important issue and movement pulled too much around authenticity. So people felt like they could be themselves at work. Well, there's lots of ways that people want to be themselves that are not welcome. So, being authentic or authenticity, I believe, has become an imitation virtue in many, many organizations. If we go to a potential solution for authenticity, I argue, and Matt, I'm going to dial you in here in a second, and we'll have a conversation about sincerity trumps authenticity. So because this, be authentic, which I also like this, you can't handle me authentic, right? Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. We know, people will say, just because we tell you to be authentic, it doesn't mean you can be an asshole. Of course, we all know that. But also, being authentic is going to require taking some interpersonal risks. And the way we actually define psychological safety is the ability to take interpersonal risks by speaking up, challenging ideas, or raising concerns without fear of being punished, humiliated, or canceled. And in the last decade, people's ability or desire or willingness to speak their mind, to speak truth to power, to say something to a fellow coworker who maybe isn't performing well or needs a bit of a kick in the butt, as a teammate. We have just given up on that for what I've heard is fear, for futility, because nothing's going to change. And my personal experience and the experience of many that I spoke to is we kind of feel like a shell of our former selves in the workplace now, despite this narrative around, be authentic. I think we're perhaps less authentic than we ever were, and this fear and this lack of psychological safety. There's a perfect example of an unintended consequence, right? That's an HR dark side. Is we want to talk about authenticity so people could feel like they could fully express themselves at work, but it backfired in many respects, as at least as much as it helped, but probably even more so backfired. And for a lot of people, they're not expressing themselves the same way that they were a decade ago, in many different ways, and a lot of that is driven by this cancel culture, and what became HR's role in overreacting to or to managing some of these situations. And so it just didn't become worth the risk. It became a very um, sterile work environment, and it's very rare where people are truly connecting with themselves and sharing their whole selves, and even sharing personal details about their family, about their background. God forbid you shared a political opinion. Like, for hundreds of years, that was okay. And when it got out of line, we dealt with it. But in today's world of HR being about complete total risk elimination rather than risk managing, we ended up with what I've heard described as cancel culture creating a rapid and reckless rise in the power of HR, resulting in weakened procedural fairness. And I'll get into the weakened procedural fairness in a minute, but let me share an example there. I don't want to get into the ethics or the argument of this particular case, but in Canada, it was a high profile case. I feel it was about 2015-ish, maybe. So pretty early in the Me Too movement and where we got started. Again, I'm not going to caveat or clarify that, of course, that those are important social justice movements and we need more. But HR maybe did not handle them always as well. And there was a celebrity broadcaster that worked for the CBC called Jian Ghomeshi. And a complaint came forward from a woman similar to what you hear with, these sexual assault cases with lots of celebrities, rock bands, hockey players, and unfortunately it does happen like far too often. And we're hopefully making great strides in fixing that. But what struck me was the head of human resources for the CBC. I believe, I got to fact check this. So I'm just saying this, recalling from my memory, but I'm going to fact check this before I put it, in writing in my book. But as I recall it, the head of human resources was terminated well before the investigation was finished or the findings were determined. And I feel like it was like within the first month. And it was all about virtue signaling. And when I saw that happen, I thought, because I've done a lot of work previously in written training programs about how we should be investigating these allegations, how we should be taking care of these in many cases crimes, and I just thought, well, procedurally, like, how can the HR person be getting fired already? I don't know the details, nor do I necessarily need to know the details. But what I was worried about, what I saw was, oh shit, every head of human resources in the country is going to overreact to that. When your livelihood and job is at risk as the head of HR and the person who's supposed to be doing these investigations and managing this really important part of when humans get together, bad things can happen. I thought the pendulum could swing, and I think it did. It became much more important that the reputation of the company, largely driven and managed by virtue signaling, became much more important than procedural fairness for what actually happened, right? And how could HR be objective in that situation where, like, if you're going to miss, you better overreact rather than underreact, right? And I think there were some cases where the overreaction harmed a lot of people and harmed a lot of lives, and I think was driven largely by this woke and cancel culture environment. The societal views, political environment, the zeitgeist, which is, I believe, German translates loosely as thinking of the time or spirit of the time, has started to shift, of course, and the pendulum might be swinging too far back the other way. But we got to get it back to a place where, frankly, for a long time, it was serving us okay. Just because a few situations weren't handled well doesn't mean we had to completely change the approach right across the function. So I think tying it back to going away from authenticity to sincerity could be a step forward in that. If you think about sincerity, it comes from what's inside. It comes from our intent. It comes from our character. It comes from our heart. It comes from what we mean. We're expressing out of sincerity. Whereas authenticity almost has this external judgment associated with authenticating something. Like, I'm authenticating that you are behaving like who you really are. I'm authenticating that your actions are aligned with your intent. And it's a really complicated, complex subject. So I'm not suggesting I have, the answer for it, but I can tell us that the employees, leaders, students, friends that I talk to, this claim of corporations and work being a place where you can truly be authentic has run its course, and we'd be better off just to retire that and choose a different direction. And perhaps sincerity is that direction. The last thing I'll say on this particular chapter, and then we'll call Matt and hear his thoughts and his takes on this subject. When we talked about that rapid and reckless rise in the power of human resources and procedural fairness, these are the 6 things that I think I've observed get eroded, or in some cases thrown right out the window in the last 10 years, as we've virtue signaled and overreacted, and maybe covered our own ass in some cases in human resources. So most I'll speak to Canada, and Canada has one of the highest standards around the world. That's not perfect, but Canada's harassment, discrimination, prevention laws, and most provincial legislation is somewhat connected to the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, something that all Canadians should be incredibly proud of. And as somebody who's had the opportunity to take the Fairmont brand and grow it in 23 different countries around the world, and to take this perspective on making sure we don't have toxic work environments, and that we manage very humans in the workplace around the world. I was very proud of what we built in Canada, and especially what we had built at Fairmont. We worked with a leading expert in this area, gentleman by the name of Paul Pierce. This was in the early 2000s. It just an amazing expert, and amazing guy, amazing trainer. And we identified several things. So the first and foremost is, when behavior has happened in the workplace, everybody has an onus to report it, and report it immediately. If it's serious enough, you don't make a list of it and keep it for 18 months. And then when you become a shitty performer, or you don't like your boss, or something has happened, you get to take that arsenal of little things that happened over an 18-month period and then get to drop it like a bomb. You have an onus to report as soon as you see it. And the reason for that is very clear. This whole field of law, this whole managing of human rights in the workplace, is not intended to be punitive. It is based on the principles of remedy and prevention. Meaning, when we see something inappropriate happen in the workplace, our very first job is to remedy it. Make sure that that action is not happening again to another person. So if somebody makes a known to be unwanted advance on a member of an opposite gender or sex, and they knew that it was a problem, then if you saw that, it needs to be dealt with right away, so that person's not being a gross pig to somebody the next day, or to somebody else, right? If something is serious enough that there's a complaint about it, we have an onus to bring it forward to remedy it. We got to make sure that that person's not doing it again. If they're being racist to one person, we have to report it so they're not being racist to the next person. It's about remedy, but it's also about prevention, right? It is what do we need to do to make sure that this is not going to happen again? And the entire procedure and the consequences and outcomes from that is all about, have we prevented it from happening again? 3, conflict of interest. I already spoke about that. The vast majority of great companies out there handle this externally. There are professional companies that have ethics hotlines, different than a whistleblower hotline. It's somewhat related, but a place where you can take your complaints and they will manage it with the leaders in the hotel, rather than the complaints coming directly to the hotel. And that speaks to my previous comment around human resources, and them having that conflict of interest, because if they mess it up and this thing blows up and they get sued, or what people worry about the most is, oh my gosh, what if there's something in the newspaper and our brand gets put in the newspaper? I better make sure that we don't underreact. We're going to overreact, or else it's going to be a bad look on human resources. 4th one is malicious complaints. So most legislation has always had a mechanism in there that looks at a couple of things that make the whole system work. One is retribution or reprisal, meaning if anybody that has a complaint against them or is involved has any consequences towards the person who brought it forward, that's immediate dismissal. That is egregious, right? That's something that is known, that is trained. You do not retaliate against people who come forward. But equally, you don't bring malicious complaints forward, bad faith complaints forward. And the one that I mentioned before is the most common. And it's kind of that situation where an employee decides they don't like their boss anymore, or they don't like a coworker anymore, and they get on a witch hunt and they just start taking their notes and marking down their dates. And they have an opportunity that when it benefits them for many reasons, they're going to bring that complaint forward, even if something hasn't happened in 6 months or however long it might be, and regardless of any of the other complex nuances and circumstances surrounding that. Procedural fairness, there are things in there like whoever is being accused to have allegedly done something inappropriate, they have a right to know what the complaint against them is, and the complaint in its entirety before the investigation occurs. There should be no gotcha tactics where the investigator is going to slowly reveal things and act like a courtroom lawyer and look for that aha moment where they caught you in the big lie, and that's gone out the window as well. And then the last one, the intent and the purpose is mitigation, not punishment, right? What do we need to do to put everybody back into the place where they were before, where the issue has been remedied, it has been prevented, and all parties are as closely back to the place they were before the problem came? And we lost that as well. It became, virtue signaling, overreacting, and frankly punishment, and a lot of people lost their jobs, and people often underestimate how traumatic that can be, and how when these pillars of fairness are thrown out the window, just how much damage it can do to individuals, to families, and to workplace cultures. So that's what Who Weaponized Woke is all about. It really talks about, instead of creating cultures that build us competitive advantage, we become hyper attentive to this issue of wokeness and virtue signaling. That's resulted in a rapid and reckless rise in the power of HR, and procedural fairness has gone out the window on something that, while it wasn't perfect, it worked for many decades and years. And when things were bad, we dealt with them. And now, based on the people that I talk to, there's all kinds of stories out there. And in my book, I can share some of the stories that I've heard from other people. So with that, let me take a small break and call Matt and see what he has to say, in particular around this subject of authenticity or workplace investigations. So that was way more than 15 minutes on that subject, but it's one I am very passionate about. Because I wrote programs with experts, I trained them around the world, I've trained thousands of people in it, and I thought that I was very proud of the way Canada handled that, and that we had a system that worked in something that's very complex with humans. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
I'm good. And you?
Good. I'm glad you've been able to follow along on the stream. I'll give you a call between a few of these questions. I won't call you on every single one of them, but I'll give you a call just to hear some of your thoughts and let you chime in. So, what are your thoughts? We previously discussed sincerity and authenticity. How have you been thinking about that, and how do you think we have a problem over indexing on authenticity versus sincerity?
I definitely, I'm not sure if I can say, I feel like we definitely have a problem, just based on the fact it's not something that people think about in the first place. Like, I never even thought about the difference between sincerity and authenticity before the first time we had this conversation. But after us talking about it, I realized, yeah, there is a big difference. And people do focus on being authentic, but that's not the same thing as being sincere. And I remember last time I spoke about how it's important to have both, like to be both at the same time. Whereas most people just focus on one and not the other. So yeah, I would say that is an issue when people focus on one, not the other. Where I feel like we all should be both at all times.
Well, and that maybe what I'm accusing corporations of, or what I've heard people complain, is that there's a lack of sincerity in our claim of wanting people to be authentic.
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Because people have tempers. People say stupid things. People make bad jokes. People use poor metaphors. Like, humans are human, and the whole point is to report that as soon as it's happened, so it can be remedied and prevented. So yeah. Other questions or thought? I shared some things that you and I haven't had a chance to talk about before. Just love to know what's on your mind and what you're thinking about.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I completely agree that, again, what's expected of you is not what being human is all about, and what is said from HR and corporate, how they want you to be authentic, they want you to be sincere, but once you are that person, then that's how you get like written up or you get fired, and like that's. And I believe that, again, obviously you're not going to be the same person at work as you are like when you go to like a sporting event or something, right? Like, there's different levels of professionalism when you're at work, but at the same time, maybe the wording needs to change if you say you want people to be authentic, but that's not really what you mean, right?
Yeah. Well, and if somebody crosses the line, you deal with it.
Right.
But it's just that the line has moved, right? The line has moved for perverse reasons, in my opinion. Meaning virtue signaling, or conflicts of interests, or woke virus, or cancel culture, or however you want to think about it. The line moved, and maybe the line is moving back now. This would have been a very, very unpopular thing for me to say 2 or 3 years ago. Even though I was thinking it, I've been deliberately waiting to see if that pendulum would swing back. And hopefully it is getting back to more reasonable, and we can at least get back to our pillars of fairness from before, and then get even better from there. Because there'll be a lot more support. There's a lot of people who are very concerned about job security, and I mean, that's right at psychological safety, right? So any other
job security. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, job security is a big issue nowadays. Like, a lot of people are worried about job security for one reason or another. And again, with the financial crisis right now, and like gas prices, like just cost of living altogether, like no one can afford to just lose their job, right? So it's a big stress factor in society at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I completely agree.
Great. I jumped over a slide that I think is important, so I'm just pulling it back up here. One of, this kind of goes to the notion of, saying be authentic doesn't give you the right to be an asshole, doesn't give you the right to be rude, doesn't give you the right to degrade somebody, or to cross the line. But what I'm actually thinking of as, in addition to sincerity maybe being part of the solution, but the right to be ignorant once might be an important thing, right? Because what it means is to be forgiven for an absence of awareness about something that matters to a situation or a person, right? So now, I believe the law is actually written in this area to say, was it welcome or unwelcome, right? So was it known to be unwelcome or ought reasonably to have been known to be unwelcome? For example, if you were a presidential candidate and you were going into a beauty competition, do you have a right to grab people's privates? That ought reasonably to be known, not to be welcome, right? But in many cases, this inability to make a mistake, or I think we have an inherent right to be ignorant once. And once we're informed that that is offensive to the other person, or once we are informed that that's making them feel a certain way, well, we're no longer ignorant. We now have the awareness about that. So I hope that can be, part of getting our workplace cultures back on the rails, and providing psychological safety for everybody, in the way that it was intended, and see that sincerity and authenticity isn't a hall pass to be rude or offensive, but that we can also be human at work, because with AI and the machines coming to work, we're going to need to be more human, and that's why this is part of this work, and why we're talking about cancel culture and woke. So
yeah, and that's completely fair. Like, you can't expect to understand what would and would not offend everyone that you meet, but once you do find out, hey, like, this offended this person, then you have the responsibility to not do that thing again.
Hey.
So yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
I'm not a lawyer, but I've written a very comprehensive 2-day course with lawyers, and that's what I've been told. So those are my perspectives. Okay, I'm going to, if you have anything else, go ahead and send me a text. But I'm going to jump into the tech question, which will be much shorter than the who weaponized woke. By design. The feedback that I got from a lot of people is this workplace culture. That's what's at the heart of it holding humans back in the workplace. So text me if you have something else, and otherwise I'll give you a call a little later.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you.
All right, take care, Matt.
All right,
bye. Okay. I'm just going to take 60 seconds for myself, and I'll be right back, and we'll get into the question about technology. Are there arms dealers in the war for talent? Okay, technology question. So I've referred to before that from about 2002 through to today, technology has hijacked the human resources agenda. And it has done it on a few promises. And the first one is that the technology will allow you to focus on more strategic things. When we first started expanding, from very simple databases, DOS-based systems, or many companies ran very well just on Excel spreadsheets, and maybe a few macros in there. But what we were promised was, hey, if you put all of this information in the cloud, and automate it and push some of the activity to the managers, which I think was a terrible idea. We just basically took work out of HR and put it to the managers, right? Whereas when HR was more being able to, take a lot of those processes for the manager as administrators, the manager could focus on production or customer satisfaction or employees or whatever. What HR feared was, the CEO is going to be looking for return on investment and firing half of our team, right? If we're now spending $100,000 a year on HR technology, cloud-based systems, they're gonna want us to have a smaller team. And so the technology sellers, helped us craft this narrative and this promise that no, it's going to allow us to do more strategic stuff. I haven't seen the more strategic stuff happen. We are doing, like, I don't know what the more strategic stuff is. Like, I call out to people and, like, what are we doing that's more strategic now that we've been enabled by this technology for 25 years? The second promise that they made was the advanced analytics will bring you whole new insights that you've never thought about. So I've been looking for that as well, to see what are the new insights that I will have from, and this is even before AI. Now, AI might be able to bring us some new insights, and that's scary. We got to, not my area of expertise, talk about a little bit in AI-penheimer, but even just the technology initially first coming with cloud-based systems. And let's be clear, the motive was to get the data to build the AIs, which eventually take all the jobs, right? That's why they wanted us in the cloud. So the promise was the advanced analytics will bring new insights. The only one that I have heard, and I heard it at two different conferences, once from a head of human resources who was sharing it as the story of their big aha that advanced analytics gave them. And then the other was from the technology sellers themselves, was, company ABC, through their advanced analytics, were able to realize that their number one driver of turnover amongst their top employees was their postal code. And so I said, okay, so what does that mean? Because we knew that 15 years ago, just through exit interviews and people telling us that their commute was too far. And of course, like, the further the postal code is, the longer their commute is. And if they're a really good employee, they're very hireable by other organizations closer to their house. Like, we didn't need advanced analytics to get us there. And I don't know if I've seen any other huge new insights that came from these advanced analytics that are certainly in service of the employee or the customer, right? They may be in service of, here's how you could make more money, here's how you could pay less, here's the other things you can do. But I challenge the HR technology people out there. I want to be educated and be wrong here. I've searched for research on the impact of HR systems in the workplace, and there's nothing of high quality that's quantitative, right? There's nothing that's getting into actual productivity numbers. There's nothing that is getting into something that would stand up to any scrutiny to say, okay, that's where the HR technology really made a difference. Even when we look at things like time to fill, quality of hire, like those things, not huge leaps from where we were with manual systems or much more basic databases. But there are some things that you see when you look for the research. Like, for example, 75% of CEOs feel that their investments in HR technology has failed or offered very little value. You can see that, do a Google search on that, you'll see that across a whole bunch. The rest of the research that I find is all written by the technology companies. Like, are we really gonna believe the person selling it to us on the impact that it has? Right? They've always taken either surveys or small anecdotes and put lipstick on that pig and said, here's the research, please send it to me. I would love to know otherwise, because hopefully what we've learned from the past we can benefit from moving to the future, because I do think if handled well, and that'll be very important, AI can help us a great deal, but the foundation that it is built on is flawed. Both foundation, as in terms of what data did we collect, how are we using it, but even more so, that data is based on old business processes, and those business processes won't be the same in the future. And those business processes have now become homogenized. They have now taken away any competitive advantage, and that's what number 3 is all about. The other HR tech promise was talent will be your competitive advantage. Well, behind talent, there are some actions and processes that companies use. And if the arms dealer is selling the exact same equipment and tools, weapons, to everybody in the industry, well, they're just perpetuating the war, right? And when I first heard this concept of a talent war 20 years ago, when I first heard it, I thought, okay, that's awesome. And it's going to be because of shifting demographics, and it's going to be baby boomers retiring, and it was going to be this, this promised land where talent would be in such demand, we'll see wages go up, and people will have job security. And it's been the exact opposite. Meanwhile, billions of dollars are being made with HR technology. I have the exact number in my paper, which I'll put a link here on the YouTube, called the AI at Work Blitz. But roughly, the human capital management industry, it's currently about $280 billion industry, and it's set to at least double to close to like between $500 and $750 billion by 2030, over the next 5 or 6 years. And I think that's probably conservative. Like, why is ServiceNow and Workday and all these other companies, why are they advertising on prime time TV? They are a business to business provider. Yet when we're watching a sporting event or we're watching the Super Bowl, we're watching an ad for Workday? I'm not sure that makes any sense. Sorry, because I'm being so critical and I am picking a fight with HR tech. And by fight, I mean, like, let's get in the octagon. I want to hear differently, because I think with some different processes, we could do differently with the technology you have. But right now, the entire HR tech industry is a giant bubble. It has lost utility, right? It has not been selling. The entire model is flawed, because what they're basically doing is selling to each other and selling to venture capitalists and private equity, right? They're trying to come up with an idea, get some users, get some reoccurring revenue, pump it up as much as possible. After 4 or 5 years, either do an IPO and go public, or get acquired by somebody else and make 10x, 20x, 30x the money that it took to put them in. Meanwhile, on the battle lines of the talent war, nothing has changed. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is I do feel, through my experience, I have a unique perspective on this. I have been shopping for and implementing enterprise-wide HR technology systems since their inception. My first one I used was in 1998 at the Fairmont Chateau Lake Louise, and it was actually DOS based. and it did everything we needed it to do, frankly. And if it didn't, we could pull out the data, put it in a spreadsheet, answer a question we wanted to answer within 5-10 minutes. I then have purchased and implemented systems for my companies on 4 different occasions over my 25-year career. And as a consultant, I have led the shopping for vendor review for 2 different clients. So over 25 years, I've had the chance to see how this industry has grown. And I've implemented 4 of the big players out there, and have shopped the next 10 or 20, because when you're buying a system, you listen to everybody's presentation. And sorry, that's the other problem with the industry is it's called concentration. The top 4 companies make up like 85% of all the systems out there, and then there's a whole bunch of these little ones that only exist to try and get bought by the top 4 companies. Here's where I think some of the flaws are. So I spoke about the utility crisis. So, and frankly, there's a utility crisis in broader technology. So instead of talking just about HR, let me tell you a story about the utility crisis in technology. So imagine today that I am having a small party and I've got 8 people over and we want to order pizza. I challenge you the next time that comes up to have one person order the pizza through whatever app they want, right? Whether it's DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever they want. And then another person, well, I actually did this. I had my son try and take everybody's order on that. And I Googled the place for the pizza place and there was a phone number and I picked it up. And they picked it up and I said, hey, I'd like to order 6 extra large pizzas. Okay, what do you want them to be? Okay, I want this one to be half this, half that. Okay, I want this one, but please take away the green onion, or sorry, the green peppers. On this one, it can be extra pepperoni, but because this one had 4 toppings and I only have 2 toppings there, could you put double the pepperoni on this pizza? Yeah, no problem. Do you want any dips with that? What do you have? Oh, yeah, these are my dips. Sure. We'll have 2 of those and 2 of those. Oh, no problem. I'll throw in a couple of extra free ones for you since it's a big order. Okay, great. Will that be cash or credit? Well, would credit be okay? Yeah. Do you want to pay at the door? Yeah, that'd be great. They'll show up at the door with a machine. Hang up the phone. 90 seconds. They hadn't even been able to 2-factor authenticate themselves and reestablish their password before I was able to order the 6 pizzas. I argue they probably wouldn't have been able to place that order before we received them. 6 pizzas with all those modifications, like it, you can't do it. And if you look at what happened with our technologies, is they became less about providing something useful to the client or to the user or to the customer, and much more about gathering data, protecting themselves from being hacked, or finding ways to suck more money out of you. And another app that I'm trying to get my head wrapped around is the McDonald's app. Like I've been ordering the exact same thing from McDonald's for 20 years. I probably only ordered once a month, but it's combo number 4. Okay, it's a quarter pounder BLT with no pickle, no tomato, large fries, and a Diet Coke. I open that app and I can find absolutely every other thing they're trying to put in front of me than the thing I'm looking for. It's always like, oh, and a tiny little more, and then you click it, and then there it is with the other combos. I think that's on purpose. I think they're trying to push other products towards me. I think they're trying to keep me on their app longer. I think there's a number of reasons that they're trying to no longer serve the customer, but rather other motives of like I said, either trying to gather more data, drive more profits, like insincere profits or bad profits, like profits driven by not providing value to the customer. And in the HR tech industry, there's much of the exact same thing. Is the processes that are designed are there much more to help the big tech companies try and feed their algorithms right? So they can, control the future of work and jobs, and much less so about trying to help people take their natural talents, apply them to the thing in their life that they're going to spend the most amount of time doing, and the thing that unites people around the world as the most commonly shared human experience. So, a couple of other things I'll say about tech. There's been an HR tech. Now I'll go back to HR tech. There's been a gap, and the gap is because we say it's going to provide us deep insights, and we say it's going to allow us to do more strategic things. And the problem is the average HR leader who's buying these systems or implementing these systems, many of them are, I'm not trying to overgeneralize, but many people find they're not that strategic, meaning they don't have a natural way to sort through options to what matters to make an impact and create value, right? They're much more process and procedural. So the HR people love the systems because they just look at it as a way of eliminating the mundane work, the stuff that they don't like to do. Oh, good. Look, we can have a bank of job descriptions. We'll never have to write a job description again. It'll all be there. Great. That's fantastic. But they haven't found the way to take the features that and the capability in the system to calibrate it in a strategic way to match the actual talent and energy of an organization to its purpose and its strategy. So it's flawed on that side. On the other side is the technology people don't understand the human resources environment a lot, right? Most of the people who are working in these tech companies have either been selling software as a service elsewhere and have come over to work. They haven't worked in human resources, or if they have, they haven't worked in human resources as an architect of business processes. So they, by no fault of their own, they don't really know what makes the difference in being able to identify, the 10 best candidates to consider for a role, or they don't know where, when managing in a workflow and there's delays and we lose top candidates for various reasons, they don't quite know what that is, or they've never had to try and configure a system to go after passive candidates, not the ones that are applying, but the best who are out there that would be happier here and could have a bigger career job here. Like, that's more strategic work. That's what advanced analytics should be doing. And so you have a customer who is really often just trying to get rid of the mundane bullshit HR tasks, and a seller or a builder of the system who doesn't really understand the nature and just sees it as the nature of workflows. Like you would from accounting. The relationship between accounting systems and human resources management systems is very, very tight, and beans and people are matter differently. So the last comment I'll make on HR tech, sorry, I have two more on HR technology. There's so little accountability for why the decision was made. So you get some budget dollars, a human resources person gets to choose what you're going to implement. And often that becomes kind of somebody in middle management, middle leadership, right? So somebody could be a manager of technology or maybe an operations manager. And it's overseen by the more strategic, head of human resources and maybe some vice presidents. But the people who are going to configure the system and run the system, they don't have the experience, because it's usually much less experienced role, and may not have the strategic judgment to be able to look at two or three different systems and truly identify those are the features that are going to work best for us. And that's why we should be using that system instead of this system. The number one reason on all the people that I've worked with on this decision that they make for choosing their system is based on service. The tech companies are selling service more than the features, benefits, strategic advantage that the system can bring. But there's so much turnover. So a couple of things. First of all, there's always the bait and switch, right? So, the person who's selling you the system, and even though they promise like they're going to be your account rep and they're going to, be the person who looks after you, many don't keep that promise. Or even if they intended to, those people are in such demand that 18 months later, they're not working there anymore. They've gone to work to the next thing, and you've just been turned into the big broad thing. So the buyer is putting too much importance on the service they're going to get from the tech company rather than what utility is this technology and how we configure it going to help our employees, our customers, our business, our shareholders, our community, etc. Last point. These systems and most technology systems are driven by, often in part of the process, what's called an MVP, minimally viable product, which means, let's get the bare bones of what we need and that could survive as a product and put it out there. And then through updates and a roadmap of updating things, we'll make it better and better over time. Well, that results in it probably isn't scratching the right itch to begin, because of the previous comment I made around the strategic impact that these systems have. But then B, because all companies use the same release or version, what happens is you have this, maybe elegant, simple initial system that did just enough for you and you could use, and it gets a million bells and whistles put on top of it that you can't use, and it makes it far too complex and difficult to be able to use. So my challenge to technology would be to change the concept of MVP to minimally valued product. I don't want technology that is minimally viable for you to call a product and sell me, or more importantly, sell your boards and your future investors, right? Because the more features, the more releases, the more things, it looks like, that's how companies get valued so much, and the future outlook looks great for this company. We've lost sight of how are people actually using these systems. And I want to be able, across all technology, to have the principle of minimally valued product, which means I only want the features up to what I value. All the other stuff, allow me to strip off. And there's a movement for dumb tech, right? We're seeing it with phones, we're seeing it for other things. And in AI-penheimer, where I pick even a bigger fight with technology more broadly, I think it is my right to still have software that I purchased 10 years ago. And if that's the version I want to be using, I should be allowed to use that version. I purchased it back then. I was more productive with it back then. And I don't want to be force fed your minimally viable products if they provide no utility or no value to me. So that's the utility crisis. That's HR technology. Those are the arms dealers. It's a classic arsonist, fireman, and fire truck maker situation all rolled into one. They've created the problem. They offer the tools, and they try and bring what they think are the solutions to our problems when they don't really understand our problems or opportunities. And worst of all, they've just eroded competitive advantage on what should be the top way you compete, through your people, through your culture. We all have the same systems now. We all do performance reviews the same way, talent reviews the same way. We build skills libraries the same way. We run the same surveys for engagement, like provide same recognition the same way. Like it's an issue, and hopefully it can get solved. Or I invite, if this ever gets seen by some of the HR tech people that I've worked with in the past, because some of you are really great and well-meaning, I would love to have a little think tank or a brainstorm around how we can take new processes, do things differently, but then provide more dumb tech, bare bones tech that will produce value. And maybe there's ways to change that entire business model, right? Maybe it's more about royalties on productivity gains and actually producing results than it is just, how many users can you get to subscribe to show reoccurring revenue to investors to drive the valuations that are incredibly overvalued right now. So that's arms dealers. Now, not only would I like to talk to people about how we can do that, but I've started to architect my own HR system. Now, I say architect because all I want to do is create wireframes and blueprints and roadmaps for different practices, some of which I speak to in this chapter and in the book and in the courses that I drive. And I've been starting to work on what hopefully in a few years' time, if not sooner, if I can find the right partners, would be TXC, that's the name of my company, TXC's technology, which we'd be calling Project Showcase. And it's filled with very different business processes, which means different workflows, means different points of strategic saturation, if you will. So, hey, if anybody's interested in hearing my thoughts further, I do believe in technology, just not the stuff we've had. And this is the time to change it and get it better. Okay, 25 minutes. I'm not going to get through all 5 because this one's going to take a while. So this question, which is all about hiring, firing, and promoting, asks, am I a one-eyed recruiter in the land of the blind? And that question was first asked to me by a CEO that I was coaching and that I thought was a great guy. Very critical thinker, not afraid to challenge things. And we were going through all this process for hiring people and, telling them, here's your candidates and here's where we need to go. And here's how we think this person will be and how this person will be. And he asked the question, yeah, but like, how do we know we're not just the one-eyed person in the kingdom of the blind? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that is a great question because the way that I'll call this selection, the way that selection works, and let's say selection works everywhere from, a job is posted, people apply for it, somebody screens or now a computer screens all those CVs. You get a longer list of 10 people, you do some interviewing, you do some assessing, you might do some psychometric testing, and then you get a short list, and then people interview that person. At the end of the day, you say, okay, that's going to be the person. And the inherent bias that is in that is well documented. And our ability to get it right is also well documented. And in most cases, it's a coin toss. For myself, I do track my history of making these decisions. To a certain extent, it's only like who worked out and who didn't. And I would say after 25 years being highly trained, having experience around the world, I can maybe bat 750, get it right 75% of the time. But the average person, 50%, like they'd be better to draw straws once they get down to their short list or flip a coin. So that's a problem and an opportunity at the same time. Imagine the power of getting people in the right jobs for them that leverage their strengths, that are in the area, both geographically, so there's not these long commutes, but also interest-wise, that develop them, that connect them to communities, that allow them to grow, that give them some meaning, give them some identity. Of course, the hygiene factor here is pays them well enough to live. Conversation for another day. But imagine the power of being able to do that at scale, or if HR and business leaders could get 25% better than we currently are. Like at scale, we are talking about changing people's lives, talking about changing families, talking about changing communities. And the decisions of who to hire, promote, and who to fire, I am shocked by how little the people making those decisions actually do know. So here's some of the big flaws that exist. The first one is bloated value of experience. And this is getting worse. So when we are looking at somebody's resume or CV, the first thing that people are looking for is experience. And I think it is a huge, huge problem for many jobs. There are some jobs out there where some experience might be helpful, but usually it's not that helpful. Usually it can hold us back because we don't know what kind of experience that person has. We don't know if they did a good job. We can't tell by looking at the CV how related that previous job is to the job we're going to be asking them to do. Because some people will inflate their titles, right? And inflate their responsibilities. You're going to have to expect some of that. But also, titles don't mean the same thing all the way across, right? Different companies. For one company, they may inflate a title and call it a vice president, whereas in another company that would actually just be called the director. Or we'll recognize a brand, right? We'll look at one and we'll see that, oh, they worked at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and they were the general manager of this giant resort. Oh, that's great. Well, there's somebody we want. So you'll start to interview them. And the people doing the interviewing don't know how to, I use the word interrogate, but I don't mean it like as interrogating the person, but really analyzing and getting facts clear on the CV. And in that particular example, what ended up happening was it was a large resort that had 3 different general managers, and it reported into a regional vice president who had a chief operating officer also at the same giant resort. It wasn't a Ritz-Carlton, but this same giant resort. Most people would look at that and see this fancy name of a resort everybody's heard of before and say, oh, wait, look, we're getting the general manager from that place. So we're valuing the experience. We can't understand the experience. And then experience is not the predictor of success for the future role. The biggest, nor is education a predictor of success, because that's the other thing we're looking for. Where did they work? Where did they go to school? Neither of them predict success in the future role. The biggest predictor of success are the people's talents, the natural way that they are wired to have things that they love to do. They do better, faster than anybody else. They can do them all day long. They never burn out. They can access flow state really quickly. They learn and make giant leaps, just natural leaps, so they become innovative. It's these things that make us who we are, that when matched to the demands of a job, or when matched to the outcomes that we need to produce, allow us to produce at levels higher, like significantly higher, 2x, 3x, 4x than others, but also unlocks innovation because we're creative. We're in there. We're seeing things differently. We've never done it before, so we're not bringing baggage with us, right? So you can look and you can ask questions. Whereas when you bring that experienced person, they're just going to bring the toolkit of policies, of procedures, of programs with them from the previous place and implement them where you are. So there's been a saying, I would have called it a principle. Yeah, it's a principle. And HR has claimed for it to be true for a quarter century. And that's that we hire for we hire for talent and we train for skills, right? Hire for talent, train for skills, that generates experience, train for skills and knowledge, right? And some companies Fairmont being one, Disney being one, Charles Schwab, Southwest Airlines, WestJet in Canada, many others were able to understand that that's the way to go. And what you're actually looking for is how well what that person has the potential to do and how high the probability of them enjoying, learning, and being good at is as they grow their career. That is much more powerful than bringing somebody with the experience and then seeing where they will go. You know, common concept that I like to think about with this is you take somebody with experience and they'll start here and they'll start to be productive for you like this. And, you know, they might start on day one, they're able to handle a few things, and then they kind of plateau and they work like that. You hire a person who has never done that job before, so they are extremely motivated to get it because it's a step up. And you've done a good job of ensuring that they're wired to enjoy doing it, do it really well, and learn a lot. I typically would call it a J curve, meaning maybe at first they're not as productive as your average employee or your experienced employee, but they learn so quickly that they come up like that quickly. Their productivity doesn't plateau. They have a small learning curve. You give them some support, you give them a good manager, you give them good training, and very quickly what they will produce, both in terms of their own satisfaction, contribution to the team, productivity, becomes way higher than the person with experience. So bloated value on experience and education, and only getting worse with the algorithms that we have. Youth unemployment is at record highs. I haven't looked at this in a while, but last I heard, this is in the United States, it was at 14%. Can't remember the exact demographic they were looking at, but up from like 7%. Similar things we're finding in Canada. Similar things I'm finding in my own house. I have 4 teenage kids here who cannot get a job because all of the jobs are posted on these job boards, and those job boards are have algorithms to be searching for keywords or key experiences to try and match people into the jobs. I don't even know, and here's a question to my technology friends out there, are any of those algorithms going as far as to say not only did that person get hired at the job, but we know how well they performed in the job, and the algorithm's trying to pick the secret sauce from that? Or any of the algorithms looking at, oh, not only did the person get hired into that job, but here's how they performed, and here's where their career went from there. Oh, they must have been successful because they joined that organization as a server. 18 months later, they were a supervisor. 3 years after that, they were a manager. 4 years after that, they were a general manager, right? Like, is the algorithm predicting trajectory and potential? Is it predicting the performance of the individual in the job? Or is it just simply saying, these are the people who are getting hired the most by other places, so therefore let's filter them and put them through? I hope some of the ideas like I just shared, and I have dozens of others, you know, and that's what I mean by the processes behind what I'm blueprinting for what I think could be good technology. I hope we're looking at things far more than experience, because even for entry level jobs, youth can't get the jobs because they don't have the experience in jobs that don't need experience. It becomes like, by the very nature, if you haven't done the job before, you don't have the experience. So are we saying like everybody that's going to work at a coffee shop or in a retail store has to have worked at a coffee shop or a retail store before? And I think that's why we're seeing an increase in youth unemployment, because they just don't have that experience, and it's becoming obviously a huge problem. So that's huge. That's number one: bloated value of experience and education. Number two, I think this is original thought. I have observed that we have very low hiring accountability, meaning whoever makes the decision of who to hire. And again, let's just imagine there's a funnel. 100 people apply. Somehow, used to be, humans would screen a CV. You know, you get down to 20. And then from those 20 people, you have a short call with them, and then you decide, okay, there's 5 that we're going to put on what we'd call a long list. And we would then hire that. And ultimately, the hiring manager is the person that person's going to report to. It's the person who is also trying to grow their career inside the company. Often, that person has maybe never hired somebody before, or they hire somebody once every 2 or 3 years. Often, and this is point number 3, is, and I'll come back to 2, but often they may not be that talented themselves. All managers out there distribute, similar to any other function, right? You've got a handful, let's call it a third, and a third. You got a third that are fantastic. You've got a third that are fine. And you got a third that, you'd maybe celebrate a bit if they left tomorrow. And yet we're letting those people make the hiring decision. And they're hiring somebody into the company that the company might have for the next decade. Or they're hiring somebody in the company that's going to impact everybody that they work with. Yet this person who's holding that decision, the most important decision a business makes, who to hire, and that person may be gone in a month, 2 months, a year, however long it may be. And they've received very little training on how to do it. A plug, we do have a training course called Selecting the Best. We can help managers get a little bit better. Maybe we can get you from 50% to 60. It's still, with your current systems and processes, it's still inherently flawed the way that we do it. So that person, A, doesn't know what to look for, but B, they are often hiring in the light of, what will my boss and my boss's boss think of who I have hired, right? So imagine you have a position, it's an important position for the company. We need to hire a regional sales manager for Northeastern United States. Somebody's trying to make that decision, who to hire, and they're looking at a bunch of CVs, and they have one that comes from, a well-known company that everybody's heard of, and they went to Harvard, and they look great on paper. And then they have another one where that person has never had regional responsibilities before. As a matter of fact, they've only been in the sales game for 5 years. Now, they've been promoted twice in those 5 years, and they've been attracted or poached or taken from one okay company to a really great company. But instead of being a regional sales manager, they're actually still just sitting as an assistant manager. The hiring manager, who's probably only going to have to explain who they hired when the announcement goes out, Acme company ABC is pleased to welcome Omar to our company. This was their background, and people will read the line, and everybody says, yeah, what a great hiring decision, right? They worked for that brand that we know. They've done the job before. Yeah, that person must be the winner. And it's the decision being made for, how can I justify who I hired, rather than having to have the courage and say, these were the 5 people we considered. And I know this person does not look like an obvious candidate, but here's what I've learned about them. Here's why they're going to be better. Here's how we're going to train them to bring out their strengths. And here's how we're going to support them to manage their weaknesses. Here's why I think they're custom fit for what we need done. Here's some of the duties I'm going to take out of that role and put over here, because this role will fit them better for a learning curve. And then later we can look at expanding their role. Those conversations are really, really hard to justify to your boss and to your boss's boss. People want to look and see, okay, Harvard MBA, worked for Citibank, or somewhere recognizable, worked for Four Seasons Hotel. They must be a great person. So the actual accountability of, who did I hire that person for and why, and then how well did they perform over time, is very, very low. And then I talked about C players can't hire A players. It's very difficult. And then the last one is, a donkey is a horse designed by committee. It is true that a panel interview and having multiple perspectives increases your likelihood of getting the decision right, as long as those perspectives understand the job to be done, the critical success factors in the job, have looked at the same information about the candidate, you're hire. But that's not what happens. We put a panel together, near the final stage, we bring somebody in, they're going to meet 5 people for the day, and they end up with 5 meetings where these 5 people, A, just visited with them and made small talk, and then B, asked them all the exact same questions. We haven't structured what we're actually looking for there. So then it ultimately ends up just bringing in so much bias and popularity, or different voices get heard differently. And I think we often miss the hiring decision because the ultimate person who's going to make that choice doesn't want to go against the grain. They're not really comfortable in fighting for that non-obvious candidate. 3 of the 5 people who were on the panel thought we should go this way, so they capitulate. They're like, okay, no, that'll make sense. I once heard somebody say to me, like on the consulting or computer side, nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM. Meaning, like, that's the safe choice, right? If you did a project and the project failed, you could at least be like, well, we chose IBM, must be a problem. Like, there must be nobody better out there. It's kind of like that with hiring people and over indexing on those things. So getting the decision right is about 2 things: understanding the job, and then understanding the person and the parts of the person that make a difference. Good companies are starting to get pretty good at understanding the person. And a lot of that work is being done through assessments. A lot of that work is being done through psychometrics and this understanding of like who we are, how we're wired, what are we going to be able to change and adapt, what aren't we? And we can get, a pretty good picture of people. I'd say, I can usually get an 8 or a 9 out of 10 on who I think that person is. Where it fails is we didn't understand the job, right? Because jobs change. Being a general manager of one business at one point of time in this context with these strategic needs is very different than it might be for this situation over here. Yet we've just copied and pasted the job description and made it look the same. Or worse now, AI has just written the job description for us. Which that's really effed up. Like, let's think about this for a second. Here's how I argue it's probably happening at least half the time out there, if not more. Somebody quits or leaves, and you got to fill a job, or you create a new job, you got to fill a job. Well, first thing you need is a job description. So the person who's going to hire that person goes to ChatGPT and types in, give me a job description for this, and maybe they add a little bit to the prompt, but not much, and ChatGPT writes a job description. We then take that job description and post it on job boards, where one algorithm and companies, for profit reasons like subscriptions, will push that job to certain people that it has selected. Just like we don't all get to see the same options for Netflix when we log into our Netflix accounts, we don't all get to see the same jobs. So somehow technology and the job boards have distributed these jobs to various places. The candidate sees it. They take that job description. Well, what do? They go to ChatGPT. They put the job description in ChatGPT. They say, write me a cover letter and change my CV to match this job description. And then they apply. We've taken the human, both the person who's accountable for making the decision and knows the business, and then the person who's applying for it, and we've completely dehumanized it. Like, where's the part in that where instead of trying to appeal to the right keywords and trying to appeal to some sort of matching algorithm, we intended to just show ourselves, to express what's inside of us, what our motivations are, what it is we're trying to do. I've even heard it's gotten so bad that coders, when trying to land jobs, will actually on their CVs write code in their CV, but put it in white font. So anybody looking at the CV can't see it. But when the computer, when the AI is looking at it, they're guiding the AI based on code that they've written. I don't know if that's true. It certainly seems plausible. We've a good sign that we've lost utility is when we all start gaming the system, and doing nonsense things, that ultimately end up creating nonsense decisions. So that's how we decide who we're going to hire. It first starts from a copy paste flawed job description that was what people used to do in the past or what people do elsewhere. And I actually think, I'll tip my hand here a little bit, that's an AI that I think could be helpful. That's an AI that I've been trying to think, how could we prompt, or whatever will come after prompt, how can we understand more about what will success look like in this job, in this role? What are the options, instead of just one person out, one person in, use the same job description, the same org chart? What's our optionality and possibilities of configuring things differently, or really determining what drives success in those roles? And I think the job design is where we can get a whole bunch better at that. And I think that comes from disintegrating jobs into tasks and gigs and little kind of missions to be accomplished, or little stages to do, rather than looking at a job as this title and these set of tasks. And I think if we can get really good on understanding jobs better, and I think AI can help us there, then we can use our ability to understand humans, which is still pretty nascent. I think that's the word, but still like in its adolescence, and will get better. Could get better with AI, although I have not figured out how much we want AI playing with psychometrics. I don't have time to get into that tonight. We'll pick up on Tuesday at that, and think of, how do we understand the job? And there's great opportunities for us moving forward to do better understanding the job. Second part, how do we understand the person? Psychometrics are like those tests that you take, right? So many people are familiar with, Myers-Briggs, which kind of gets into 16 different personality categories. Some people are familiar with StrengthsFinder or the Gallup work, which has a construct of 30 to 50 different talents that can be identified to say, like, what probability of behaviors and reoccurring patterns exist in a person. And then another great one that I really like, it comes from a company called Hogan, and stands for HDS. And that's all about derailers. So, having studied how would you perhaps predict failure in this job, or when under stress, what's going to cause this person to derail? So psychometrics is a huge industry. It's filled with all kinds of ethical concerns, privacy concerns, risks in letting AI know that much about how complex our brains are. In the Mission Impossible, the latest one. So the first episode from the latest one. So not Dead Reckoning, but the one right before that. And in the Mission Impossible, they're trying to take this nuclear bomb, or this big bomb, and disarm it. And Benji, the redhead guy, he's trying to get this thing done. And because the bomb's being controlled by AI, it's asking it questions. And one of the questions it asks Benji is a psychometric related question. I gotta look at it and say what it is. And nobody could figure the answer. And then Benji says, no, it's a psychometric. It wants to know that about me. And my antenna just went up, and I thought, oh shit, that is scary. How much do we want to let the AI know about how we're wired in our heads? Because even the existing psychometrics we have today are really powerful when you know what to do with them. And the three I have across the screen here, they've been around for 30 or 40 years, 25 years, and I'll guess 15 years. Like, they were built by industrial organizational psychologists using, peer-reviewed, validated, replicated methods to ensure that they are, accurate enough. If you wanted to, oversimplify, you say like 80% of the time, 85% of the time. And they're really powerful. And in the courses that I teach, we do lean towards these a lot, particularly for the candidate to understand themselves. The results you see on the screen are actually my results. So under Myers-Briggs, which has 16 different categories, I'm what's called an ENFP, which means so between extroversion and introversion, I'm extroverted. N means intuition. So between intuitive and sensing things, like seeing, sensing, touching, I am intuitive. Between thinking and feeling, I'm more a feeler. And between perceiving and judging, I'm more of a perceiver. Fits me great. I've understood it since 1998, and I've been able to craft my career around it. It stands for Everyday New Fantastic Possibilities, ENFP. So, it allows me to be a crusader or a visionary or somebody who wants to look at possibility and how we can do things differently. In StrengthsFinder, strategic, competition, futuristic, communication, and woo, which stands for winning others over. And then on the Hogan derailers, where I derail is because I can be too bold. I can get mischievous. I don't mind, kicking the hornet's nest. I don't mind taking shortcuts when shortcuts should be taken. I don't mind bending the rules a little bit within reason, or I can get too imaginative. And if you look behind me at my wall, you can probably see that I can get a little bit too imaginative. So I just wanted to share that to give you a bit of a flavor in case you weren't familiar with psychometrics. Those are my 3 recommended psychometrics. There's 7 or 8 other good ones out there, 5 or 6 other good ones out there. The difference is that each one of them is measuring something different. And the key is, there's a couple of keys. It's not the psychometric itself, but it's how we use it. Is the person making the decision familiar enough with what it's saying? Does it matter to what we're trying to say is probable in that role? And ultimately, the question is not how talented are you? The question is, how are you talented? Right? So the psychometrics should never be used to say, here's the set of scores that we want, and whoever is closest to those scores, that's the person we're going to hire. The deeper question is in saying, because humans are complex and so unique, and we have 3 to 5 people, we're trying to decide the fine decision of maybe who should we choose for that role, changing that from how much they fit our model to how are they wired, and based on that, how are they going to go about accomplishing what we need them to accomplish. Perfect example to wrap up on that. Let's take a look at sales. So the average person, if they were thinking about trying to hire somebody based on their talents and how well they're wired to succeed in sales, often you'll hear them say, well, we're going to need somebody who, is outgoing. We're going to need somebody who, likes to talk. We're going to need somebody who, is commanding. We're going to need somebody who networks a lot. They're going to need to have a lot of woo. That would be kind of like the standard, here's the box that we think that person should fit in based on our assumptions, our generalizations, our stereotypes. Well, it actually turns out in sales roles, many sales roles, it's much more about building a close relationship with people that matter and it being sincere. So rather than prospecting for 1 million people, having a close, tighter, being more about being a relator rather than just friendly. It's much more about, what we might call belief or service. Like the number one thing that drives sales performance is how well somebody believes in what they're selling, and that what they believe in even more is helping other people. So when you can look at it from that direction, you can get away from the generalizations and the stereotypes to say, I need to find somebody to fit this mold, but then use the psychometrics to say, how is that person talented? And how are they going to go about it? And if so, what results do you think we would see from that? So I have hours and hours worth of content on psychometrics. The technology I'm developing, some of the processes I'm developing early stage tries to take this to the next level. I think if handled well, things like artificial intelligence, it's scary, but we got to figure out how to use it right. But then even more so, simulations, assessments, those are the things that can help us make better decisions. And that's where a lot of my passions are. So I'm going to pause there. For Tuesday, I have more to talk about on what else we can do about the recruitment process. Biggest takeaway for today, those are the flaws that we see in them, whether it's experience or A players versus B players, or bloated experience, education, etc. Then about the ability to understand deeply the jobs and then the people. And my hypothesis is we're doing okay on the people, and we can get even better as we go, as long as we do it ethically and carefully. But it's understanding the jobs that we don't understand. When good people fail in organizations, usually it's not because that person was the wrong person to choose. It's because what they applied for and what you thought you were hiring them to do is not what the job ends up being. And they end up being in an environment that just wasn't suited for who they are. So, okay, that is it for today. We will pick up on Tuesday, and we will finish up on the recruitment question all around. Am I a one-eyed person? Am I a one-eyed recruiter in the land of the blind? And then we will get into our other confronting questions. Is S.M.A.R.T dumb? What if TED Talks and TikToks aren't enough? So thanks for your time today. Look forward to the next stream.